Hey everyone, I am Heidi Ferguson, and next to me in royal blue is my podcast partner, Vanessa Ramsey. And today we have a very special guest, my sister-in-law, Amber Gray. And so I'm going to introduce her and then we'll do a little check-in as we always do. Dr. Amber Elizabeth Gray is a trauma therapist and teacher trainer. Her work has had a profound impact on survivors of trauma, war, and trauma by enabling them to experience safety, express love, and to trust others. On a more personal note, she's my sister-in-law and has impacted my life in different ways. I appreciate her for many reasons, one of which she is 100% her full human self. She lives authentically in her body and willingly expresses herself when it is necessary, which is all the time. It is an honor for me to introduce you and to our audience, my sister-in-law, Amber Gray.
Thank you.
Yes, welcome. Thank you.
Both.
So we're going to start with check-ins, and I'm happy to begin. And, one of the things that's been kind of up for me recently is this, well, besides what's happening in the world, also, on a more personal note, like just kind of what's happening within me and how I identify. And like, I've been exploring more of that, my own personal identity in the world as a woman, my own sexual identity and what that means. And because what I shared with a friend earlier today is that what I'm finding myself doing more often than not, when I have to fill out a survey or something that asks me about my nationality, my race, my gender and all that kind of stuff, if there's an option that says other or you can leave it blank, I typically leave it blank because I'm just thinking to myself, is that really necessary? Is it really necessary for me to identify as Caucasian, as female, as, any of that? I don't know. That's just sort of where I've been. And so it's led me to kind of be curious about other things about myself. So that's kind of been up. And also in that realm, I'm finding that what it brings me back to is connecting deeper within myself and my connection with spirit and how that shows up in my life. And I'm like, wow. So if I simply ask, I will receive. Like, that's how we manifest. And but we also have to really believe in ourselves. And so I'm really honoring that. I want to say honoring that in the moment as we are sharing here, just doing our check-ins. So I think that's kind of where I'm gonna, stop and ask. I don't know who wants to check in next, but that's kind of where I am. Are you ready, Vanessa, or do you want to go, Amber?
I can go. I'm in my office in Albuquerque, which is where I work with my clients, many of whom are refugees, and I'm always settled when I'm here. It's a very settling place. So that's like in this moment, and settled for me means relaxed, nice, even heart rate and breathing. My physiological state is calm. I feel connected because it's such a blessing and a privilege to do the work that I do here. I also have a courtyard that I can look at where that's a reminder for me of purpose is the word that I would use. The courtyard's always been there, but on March 11th of 2020, when I'd had a series of dreams in late February about the coronavirus, what we were calling it then. And I knew it was coming down the pike because I get a lot of information from dreams. And I was like, oh, I need to make sure the birds are okay. That was my first response. Like, we're going into something big. I'm going to start, taking care of the birds. We live in a desert, so they have water and food. And it's become a ritual to, even when sometimes if I don't have clients, to come down and just tend to them. And so I'm just and I think in the last year, I've lost both my parents. The world, I think there's so many ways I could describe the world we're in. We've been at a crossroads for a while, and I try to stay very attuned to that crossroads. And I think the tending to, that's kind of what I'm at, where I'm at is what is it that I really want to tend to for however long I have, in a way that's nourishing for me. Because I believe the most significant caregiving we can give is when we're tending to ourselves first, or when there's a deeply reciprocal exchange that happens. So I'm in that question of tending and how I want to tend myself, my birds, my work.
That is just so yummy. I love the word tending because it has me feeling nurturing and also engaged and active. So thank you for bringing that in here. And I love that you gave to this whole other species in that time as a way of honoring life and having service, right? Acts of service. That's so sweet to me. And I feel some tenderness hearing you've lost both your parents recently. That feels profoundly big. Yeah. So thank you for sharing that. And yeah. Well, gosh, where am I? I'm always in many places, so I'm arriving. I'm trying to rock the Priscilla Presley hair, and I need some more info from people on how to make it bigger, because that's just what I'm vibing these days.
Up top here.
It's like what makes it do more of this is what I need to know.
Hairspray.
So, yeah, and I just love that you're here, Amber, because I know for me, as a war baby from Afghanistan, definitely noticing my own trauma response coming up over the last, well, since August, really, with the homeland, but then again in the last few weeks. So I have questions there around what any of us in a position that gets familiar and a bit traumatizing can do to still be resourced and serve. So thank you. It feels divinely timed that your presence is with us. And then what have I been thinking of? I always have mixed feelings on International Women's Day. Like, I want to celebrate the badass, amazing women in my life. Definitely a part of it. But I get really angry on that day too about like all the suffering and all the women who don't get to have the freedoms, the full expression, the financial, economic freedoms that they deserve. So it reminds me there's more work to be done, and I get a little pissed off whilst celebrating that there is just this grand, amazing community I'm a part of women that do great work in the world. And Heidi, I'm with you on like, do I need to identify? Like, I had to fight a doctor's office on like, why do you need to know my race? Like, I'm part of the human race. Why do you need to know? And I'd like to see us be beyond that. And I just get curious why that's even necessary. So thanks for even bringing that too. Yeah. And I'm also holding just this really cool thing that you two are family. So how is this feeling to be live on a podcast with each other, maybe with some curiosities you don't normally have in the day-to-day experience to share? Like, what is this like for you two right now?
Well, it's actually familiar because I don't see Heidi that often, but when I do, we often have deep conversations. We can go there. And I think that's one of the things that I really appreciate about you in our family system of, humanity in the whole world, and in your particular family system, and coming from my family system. But so there's a familiarity for me, even though we've never done this exactly before. But yeah.
Yeah. I want to go back a little bit and address the race thing. So I think what just kind of downloaded for me pretty quickly was that there is already so much division just happening naturally whether it's politically, whatever it is. And I'm like, is this just one more way for them to keep us, I don't know. It just, so anyway, like, yes, we all are part of the human race, so let's love and embrace that. So what is this like for me? It's really sweet. And like Amber said, when we do have an opportunity to talk and take that opportunity, we really very quickly go deep. And I don't necessarily have that with anyone else in my immediate family. And so when Amber joined our family, and I was trying to remember today, Amber, the first time we met. And
I met Carl first. Obviously, I met your parents, and it was just your parents in '89. I don't know when I met you all. Was it it might have been at Dawn's wedding?
Oh, it was either Dawn or Jane's wedding. Yeah, probably Dawn or Jane's. Yeah, probably Dawn's.
It was Dawn's, because I think Dawn got married first.
Yes, she did.
Yeah.
Yes. In any event, yeah. So, and I just remember like seeing Amber, and I was like, oh, she's in my tribe. Like, she certainly, because I've always felt like on the outside of my family, I've felt like out on the, on the perimeter. And then I saw Amber, and I was like, I want more of that. And I need more of that in my family. And oh my God, my brother is dating her. What? Because she's so out of the ordinary for my family. Like, it just, and I was like, wow, good for you, Carl. Like, good for you to marry someone with a really strong personality, speaks her mind, is really truthful, and I also want to say doesn't really give a shit what other people, like, just kind of is herself. Yeah. So there's an appreciation, a true, genuine appreciation from my heart, that you showed up in my life, and that Carl made this happen however it happened. Yeah. Thank you.
I'll say, sorry.
No, I was just saying thank you for that question, because we've never talked about this.
Yeah. It just reminded me, I want to share this since it is, yesterday was International Women's Day, and it is International Women's Month. One of the things when Carl was, I guess I'll use the word, courting me, and he was in Africa, in the continent, and I was in the US, he would send, I remember when it was, I think it was a year or two, on International Women's Day, I'd always get a fax, because that's the only way we could communicate quickly, saying Happy International Women's Day. And he still acknowledges it. Yeah.
That's
I mean,
so
women are powerful, and men who can be intimate with their own and others' femininity, which he can, are powerful too. Yeah.
Oh, I love knowing that about Carl. That's really sweet.
I love that too. Yeah, and there's something I've been sitting with too, is like, when people say the future is female or whatever, and I really am feeling like the future is union. It's going to be the really healthy masculine, the really healthy feminine, and I'm holding like the non-binary stuff too, because like I want to be inclusive there. Like, all of us as a healthy village, bringing our gifts and hopefully blessing each other. And I do recall a time in my life when I kind of had that man hate thing on, in terms of at least the men I was coming to know, and realizing like, wow, that was really more stunted boyhood than like the masculine. So I'm still parsing apart like those pieces for me of what is the healthy masculine, what is the healthy feminine, what is just like a healthy human who's compassionate and celebratory towards the people in their lives. Like, that feels the community I want to be a part of.
Yeah, same.
Yes.
So Amber, I'm curious, as I was looking at your body of work, I mean, you've just done so many different things, and the thing I think that I'm most familiar with is your dance therapy, and then working with survivors of trauma and war, and I know those two are, united, and I'm curious, how you even got to that place.
Mm,
And then like if we were to go back 40 years, like when we were in our 20s or whatever, early mid 20s, early 30s, did you know, like, were you thinking at some point you would launch to be where you are? Like, were you kind of building that in yourself, like creating that, manifesting that, knowing that this is what you want to do one day? Or I'm really curious to know how you got to where you are.
hmm. I'll start by saying, by saying 40 years ago, I'm sure I was manifesting and building it, and I'm not sure that I would have said exactly this. I mean, there's a couple things. I always like to quote my dad here, who I had to interview when I was getting my master's in somatic psychology and dance therapy. We had to do a project on our birth and interview our parents about it. And the first thing out of my dad's mouth is, "You were born dancing and fighting, and you've never stopped either." And he always said that's one of the reasons that he was so proud of me. So I don't know everything that he was referring to. When I was a little girl, we spent summers in Cape Cod, and my favorite thing to do was to sneak out in the middle of the night, go to the beach and dance to the waves and the wind and the moon. And certainly, I mean, I think I love dance possibly more than anything. And I did ballroom dance and jazz and stuff like that, but I flunked ballet, which was, in the dance world, that was back in the 60s and 70s. That's what you're supposed to do. And I'm not, I was immediately told that I would never be a ballet dancer because I'm curvy and all that. So I tried, and then, I think what I knew was how important dance was for me. I mean, I think dance is how the spirit expresses itself in the dwelling place of the human body. It's such a potent creative process, healing process. And I don't know if I would have found dance therapy if I hadn't found Haitian dance, which happened in a modern class in New York City, the Dunham technique. Catherine Dunham was a early modern dancer, Black, traveled to Haiti, adapted a modern technique from Haitian dance. And I would take those classes. And unbeknownst to me, once she was in class, I just saw this old woman standing there. And at the end of class, she called me over and just looked at me and said, "You should do traditional Haitian. That's what lives in your body." And I was pissed because I'm like, she's telling me that I'm really bad at modern dance. And the girls in the class were like, "What'd she say to you? That's Catherine Dunham." I'm like, "Oh, really?" So that led me to, working in Haiti. And I mean, I worked with street children there. I set up a program for survivors of torture and violence. But so there's that. And then the activist, thread that I came in on has just always manifested in different ways. And it's often in humanitarian or development work. I remember being in a bar with my parents in Maine when I was probably in high school. I think we went up to Maine, and telling them that whatever my life was, I wanted to travel. So that, I don't know that it was, and I wanted to join the Peace Corps. That was it. It was Peace Corps. So Peace Corps and dance, I think, were two things that were really important. And so it's just been alchemy, things keep mixing and bubbling and becoming something. And because I've had tremendous love and support from my parents, I want to name that. I mean, privilege, the financial privilege, the resources, but more importantly, the love and support. I could throw just about anything at my parents, and they might have a few things, like, really, is that practical? But the support was always there. And a lot of my education later on, I just manifested myself, worked really hard to pay for it. So it's been following, I really think it's been following, I mean, it sounds cliche to say following my heart or following my passion, but that's what it's been, is paying attention to what opened up in one career or job and starting to merge them together. So when humanitarian work became too dry for me, and when I got tired of the very colonial nature of it, most humanitarian work is still very colonial, in my opinion, I looked for something different. And I remembered the call to dance. And I had an experience in Rwanda after the genocide, where I was welcomed to a completely war-destructed village by the only remaining inhabitants, who were children, orphaned, with whatever scraps they could find. They danced and drummed a welcome song. Like, they gathered bits of cans and they had some instruments left, and they welcomed us. And my interpreter explained what was going on. And I was like, whoa, that is you know, the depth of connection that I felt and that spark. So I followed that. Probably with, you know, a lot of hope and enthusiasm and some naivete, like, oh, I knew I wanted to go into something more psychological, like, oh, dance and movement will be much more accessible. It is and it isn't. By definition, people suffering any kind of trauma, but especially when it's interpersonal or collective human rights, power abuse, it inhabits the body in a very particular way. So the freedom of expression, whether somebody, however they knew that before, requires a lot of as much safety as possible to start to tap into again, or to start to liberate again. And I've learned that from my clients over the years. So it's been a real journey, but I think, I mean, I hope that answered the question. It's really a weaving of what arose and paying attention. You know, I think it's very easy. We were talking about boxes in the beginning. There's this thing, you know, you're going to go to college, right? You're going to go to, I grew up in the Wilton, Connecticut. Well, I didn't grow up because I'm never going to grow up. I like to say I'm going to grow in because I'm silly and I like to have fun. But it was all about Ivy League, and IBM was the big thing. And, you know, there's just this expectation, like, and I'm like, why do we live in boxes? Like one of my favorite teachers would say, we don't do movement, we are movement. Like, we're literally an unfolding process of aging and dying cells, and that's who we are, and, you know, regeneration. So yeah, I think being supported to pay attention to that and to follow that is how I got here. And I'm very grateful.
Feeling all of that. Thank you. Yeah. To follow the journey. I think paying attention and to follow that journey, probably just as humans is one of the most important things we can do for ourselves to continue growing, because our growing never stops. Wow, yeah, that's great.
I'm going to add one thing that I think is important. It's also not to look away. I think one thing, you know, we talked about boxes, but not to look away. So in Rwanda, there's a lot of people who probably wouldn't choose. I was invited, I was actually on vacation visiting your brother. And I wanted to go when I was given the opportunity. Bearing witness is something I talk about. It's what my work is. I think it's the most profound, probably, aspect of doing the work that I do. And it's, you know, Guatemala, when I was in the Peace Corps, I came right in an area that had just opened up after the Civil War that was still raging in another part of the country, you know, listening to stories every day of ditches full of dead bodies. I witnessed somebody being tortured when I was in Asia once. And there's such a, the human myth that life is always perfect, or that we're supposed to have the white picket perfect life, to not look away from the suffering, because that's the mirror that reflects the beauty. And I really believe that. And so I think, you know, I'm naming the support and the love and the privilege, but also naming the courage not to look away. Because a lot of us that have privilege or don't experience oppression, displacement, that's one of the boxes that's been created, you know, just crawl into it and just don't look around. But we have got to start looking at it and letting it affect us and move us.
So I'm appreciating that. And so I wanted to ask a follow-up. So given that, you know, what's happening in the world is on display for us 24/7 if we want to see it.
Yeah.
And I tend to be one of these people who is deeply sensitive and deeply affected by what I see. And because of what happened during 9/11, and I had watched a lot of coverage, I actually gave myself PTSD. I was diagnosed about 9 months, a year later. I didn't know what was going on. And it's because I had watched so much coverage. So after that, I've made it so I have literally stopped watching the news. I don't feel good when I watch it. And so my question then is, I mean, of course, reading material and that kind of thing, but how can I protect myself so that I don't re-trigger myself, um, and still being paying attention?
Yeah.
Is that question make sense?
Yeah. Well, I mean, honestly, it sounds like you are. I mean, bearing witness certainly doesn't mean watching the news. I mean, and I actually just said the other night to my husband, I was like, because there was somebody, one of the news reporters was in Ukraine, and he was walking around and he came across a body that never used to show on the news. I remember the Vietnam War, 9/11. I actually never looked at 9/11. I didn't look for several days because I was working with the most of my clients at the time. I was the clinical director of a torture treatment program. Most of my clients were from Afghanistan. I chose not to look at that. I chose to be with my clients. So there's a lot of, it's like a diamond. There's a lot of different prisms of what we might be able to, cast our gaze on and look at. So I think bearing witness means being willing to know about it. Whether you read it from the news or just ask somebody, or can make a donation to something, or whatever we can do. It's not looking away. It's just not pretending that it's not happening, or having that it's so far away it doesn't affect us, because we know that it does. But I mean, it sounds like you are protecting yourself, and that's what a lot of we therapists say to people: don't watch everything on TV over and over. There's evidence, and 9/11 was when a lot of people learned that people were getting saturated detrimentally by watching what happened. I waited several days and then I watched some of the footage. And I think it's because I was so, my clients that moment knew what was going to happen. They knew what was going to happen to their country.
Uh-huh.
So for whatever reason, I couldn't watch it.
Uh-huh.
But I think it's so important. I mean, for everybody, because I often work with, I supervise clinicians, or when I've run programs, I've hired clinicians, and people will often have trepidation, I don't know how I'm going to do with this, hearing these stories. And we all have to have practices. I mean, one of the things that I emphasize is the savior mentality is one way to look at it. Therapists are often trained to be empathic, to use empathy, which we do use, we need to use. It's very powerful. It's how we connect. All the research on mirror neurons as part of the pathway that creates a shared body state. But my clients taught me many years ago that if I relied on my empathy only and was really like feeling, and I can remember in my activist days, wanting to be soy de la gente, con la gente, like that's Spanish for, I'm with the people, I am with the people. If I over-identified or didn't maintain my sense of separate self, not only would empathy create burnout or exhaustion, and it's been directly linked to those vicarious trauma, but it could be uncomfortable for my clients. I had one client who one time just said to me, and I tend to actually physically lean forward, and I think I was just really being empathic, and he said, "Don't mock me." And I backed up and I said, "I'm not sure what you're talking about." And I apologized, and I kept going. And then he pounded the table and he said, "Don't mock me." And I said, this was our first session. I said, I apologize. I don't know what I'm doing. And he says, "You're looking right through me. You feel me. That's what they did when they tortured me." Empathy can be exploited in service of cruelty. So the practices that I teach and talk about are compassion. And I have a lot of people interchange those words, but there's a clear difference. And this became evident to me about 18 years ago. Compassion is the recognition of suffering in others because we know our own, but they're distinct. Empathy is part of that. We can travel towards compassion by being empathic, but if we rely on that sharedness, what good is it if I'm the same puddle on the floor that my clients are? I have to be holding the space. I have to be present. I had another client once say to me, I think I was probably trying to be too much like He actually looked at me, he says, if you'd step into your and own your privilege, I'd have a lot more respect for you. He says, clearly, he said, you're not the one who's he came from the continent. You're not the one who was tortured. You're not the one who lived under apartheid. You've clearly got, I think I was apologizing for going on a vacation or something. And I was feeling this guilt. He's like, if I had your privilege, I'd be doing exactly what you're doing. He said, so step into it, own it. He says, do it for those of us who can't. So self-compassion, I always say there's practices, loving kindness meditations, going to your favorite class, knowing what you love to do, what nourishes you. That is a really powerful way to protect ourselves. If we feel good about ourselves, we're much more able to hold the space that we need to hold, whether intentional or whether we want to, or whether we suddenly find ourselves in a situation where we have to be present for something that maybe we weren't planning on. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's, yeah.
Yes, it completely makes sense. Thank you. Yeah. But Esther, did you want to?
Yeah, I'm having all kinds of feels over here, just in relation to the homeland and hearing even just the word torture. Like I feel the pain in my heart, and just really appreciating you for naming the distinction between empathy and compassion. I know for myself, with my history alongside what I'm witnessing, I can fall into that empathy puddle and be rather useless for a few hours, and then kind of like get through it and then come back into a more resourced place that's compassionate but can direct focus and be resourced and do something with that compassion. So I think it's important because a lot of us, I hear the word helplessness a lot with my clients, people of privilege watching what's going on but maybe falling into that empathy puddle. So I just like knowing that language, and then this place in me that's just recognizing, like, ooh, how do we let someone have their experience without leaning so far in that we're taking away from their experience, right? There's a dance to me of like, you don't want to lean so far out that there's apathy, but you don't want to lean so far in that you are maybe robbing them of just being seen, being witnessed in the way that might serve them. And I'm just thinking of that as a relationship coach. Like when someone's deep in it, in conflict, I can bring some of, like, I can relate, but if I grab the mic too much, right, then it's problematic. And then just noticing where, like, I imagine there's work for me to be able to hold better space for people. And it's sort of like it's a spectrum, right? It's like, oh, I think I do it well, but then there's a snag. And now there's not, like, I'm taking as much care of myself as I am doing activism. And maybe that's the balance right now. And maybe that's okay. But there's also this feeling when I hear some of those descriptions, right? There is a part of me that wants to look away.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It is painful. And what I've been practicing is not looking away, like remaining with my friends who are affected, who have family in Russia or in the Ukraine, who are directly impacted or directly impacted in Afghanistan, and being like, the more I can have capacity for that discomfort and sit with it, there's actually more moral courage, more righteous anger, more of a spark to create change. So the turning away, while can be helpful sometimes, I think you just have to know yourself.
Yep.
This staying and bearing witness is actually birthing something really powerful for me. And I'm still in it. So it feels like part trauma response, part, like, I don't know, badass Care Bear kind of coming online. And it's messy, I think, just owning that it's messy to keep looking, but to grow capacity for it at the same time. I don't know that there's any other way to build that capacity personally.
No, I love what you just said, actually. That I think it's so rich, and and what I'm sensing, feeling is, we can bear witness and still look away to protect ourselves. But I also want to name it up. Apologies about my phone. I have to hotspot because my office doesn't actually have internet, which is intentional. This is a, I don't think I can turn my phone off, but I think, I can't speak to this from experience, but from my clients, when it's part of your history. So I've been to war zones and worked and actually really love that work. I've always known that I could leave or likely would leave. It's never assured, right? When you're in a war zone. It's very different when it's your own homeland and your own people. And again, I'm reflecting what my clients have taught me. And so I imagine, as I was listening, I imagine that the empathy strings are plucked a little bit more deeply because it's real. It's your experience. And I don't know what that means, but it can mean many things. It can mean a much deeper connection and understanding. It can mean acknowledging that we may have to be comfortable with, a lot more of our vulnerability than somebody else might. We may need to sometimes practice more self-compassion. So I always say self-care is self-compassion is self-care, self-care, self-compassion. It's all self-respect. So what do we need to do to respect ourselves? We might need to look away, but it doesn't mean we're forgetting or we're not present. Yeah. So, it can mean so many things. And it's messy. It's super messy. And, as a therapist, one of the trends in the US, actually in the world now, because the world seems to still feel like the US is the leader. Everybody follows some of the things we do. This evidence-based treatment, which it does. It means things have worked in very particular contexts, usually randomized controlled trials. The real work is messy. The real work is messy. I always say every time I show up for a client, yes, I've been doing this 25 years and I'm beginning again. I have no idea how I'm going to wake up every morning. I have no idea how I'm going to show up. I had somebody say something to me the other day and I just had to pause and breathe. And I started tearing and I just said, and I just acknowledge it, just like that. Really, I'm really feeling that. And I just need a moment for these tears to drop. And then center and come back to myself. So yeah, it's messy.
I love that. Just even bearing witness to each other and allowing permission to be messy, I think. Right. And thank you too for normalizing, maybe as someone who's experienced that and then watching others experience it, it just feels a little extra strings plucked for sure. And still like a living invitation to heal more in order to be able to serve. That's what I'm receiving from it. Is I don't want to be slowed down from my service. And what a great reason, what an honor to have that be a reason for more healing.
Yeah. I always say I always say to people, beam 1,000 times the love you have for others, beam that onto yourself. Because I really believe that it actually refracts and magnifies. And then there's that much more that goes out. I'm not a physicist. I've got the worst grade in my life in geometry, but I know that I just believe that that's true, on a human level.
Yeah. And, I'm a believer that everything is energy.
Yeah.
Literally everything is energy. And so if we carry that with us, there's no way that we can't be, if we are loving ourselves, there's no way that because everything is energy, that it won't be put out into the world. The tentacles are many. There are millions of tentacles. And when I think about the game, what was the Kevin Bacon? What is the
6 degrees or 7 degrees or something?
6 degrees to Kevin Bacon, how connected people are.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And I'm just like, it's usually not that it's not even that many connectors. Like we think we are so far removed from someone on the other side of the earth, and we're really not.
No,
We're really not that far removed. These are things that we tell ourselves. Why we tell ourselves these things, I don't know. Maybe it makes it easier, or we think it makes it easier. But I feel like, if I know, even though I don't directly know who I'm connected to, or who I'm, yeah, energetically connected to, just knowing that my Care Bear heart like emanates all this love, like for me to put it out there, I know that I am getting like a million times back.
Yeah.
It's so lovely. And so and I guess, I wanted to add that, in this messiness, if like we I think a lot of us are afraid we're doing it wrong, like, because we're messy. And the bottom line is that if we can remember one thing, and that is that we're humans in our humanity, living in that. And if we show up for ourselves, knowing that we're doing the best that we can, that is what we're putting out into the world. I'm doing the best that I can for myself. That's what I'm putting out to the rest of the world. That will come back. Like, it's just, like I said, it's energy. And to believe that, to have faith in that, I will say it will change the planet. It does change the planet. And so yeah, there's a lot there. So I kind of want to pivot a little bit, because I know that you and Carl recently swam with whales.
Humpbacks. Yeah, humpback whales.
So I'm so curious, how in the world is this something you've always wanted to do, or Carl wanted to do?
Well, no, I've done it. I lead retreats every year in the South Pacific. They're called Dancing the Wild Home.
Okay.
And we swim with humpback whales. Now, the last 2 summers I haven't gone. It's in August because of COVID. Tonga, where I lead the retreats, has been closed. But where it arose from, I think I was in my 20s and I had a dream. And in the dream, I was on the coast of California with my father, and we were in bleachers, big bleachers, like big bleachers looking out on the coast. And we couldn't get off the bleachers, and we were trying. And as we kept trying to get off the bleachers, my dad was getting more and more stooped. Literally, I was watching him age. And I remember I all of a sudden realized that we were trapped, and that my dad, it was paying homage in advance to my father's death. And of course, a literal interpretation, I woke up thinking, oh my gosh, is he going to die? But when I started to feel this panic in the dream, I turned and looked at the ocean, and 4 whales started doing synchronized swimming. And I woke up and I was like, okay, whales. And I just knew what they were telling me is that it was going to be okay. That's all I got from it at that time. What I now know is that they were teaching me about compassion. What I just shared about compassion came from my clients, from an amazing psychologist named Henry Toby up in Denver, who was one of my mentors when I was in school, but also from the whale dream. And one of my Australian students, now colleague and dear friend, had an opportunity. She met somebody in Australia who led free diving trips in Tonga, where they meet the whales. And she's like, that's the only country in the world you can actually do it in. Get in the water with them, and it's extremely regulated and very whale centric and whale friendly. And she's like, I just think you have to do that, because you always talk about whales. And because I had this idea about their compassion. So she connected us. I went on one of their trips, and I was very transparent. I said, I want to start leading trips. Do you want to partner? And he's still my friend. He said, I think you should just sort of do your own thing. And so I started. And so for 5 years, I led these retreats, and I have one scheduled. I got a full trip supposed to go in August. But because we haven't gone in 2 years, I learned about the Dominican Republic. And there it's different. You're not on a land, you live on a boat, you go 90 miles offshore. And I just wanted to try it. And I just made Carl come along. At first he was like, I don't know, being on a boat. And I'm like, if you don't come, somebody else is coming with me, but I'm going to go check this out. And I'm wanting to partner with them and lead retreats as well. It's a different time of year. I'm part whale. That's what's clear to me. I'm happy. The ocean. I mean, I've always been an ocean person. Put me in the water and I'm just in my place. But more importantly, the whales, my retreats tend to bring people in who are either caregivers working with survivors, or I've had a lot of people who have come to my classes or my students or mentees and they've experienced trauma. And the whales are magicians. And I mean that in the sense of magic as the language of spirit, magic as the language of possibility, because possibility is what trauma erases. They are magic and they do the work in a profound way. And I have seen it over and over, what people talk about, the gaze of a whale, their willingness to interact. And if we're willing to listen, they are the emissaries of compassion and love. They are so much more intelligent than we are. And I believe it's because my theory is their heart and brain are more connected. You know, we used to think the brain was our brain, the heart was a involuntary pump. We now know that the heart, 60% neural tissue, the amplitude of the electromagnetic wave, 60 times that of the brain. So you're absolutely right. We do connect at the heart. I think they, by virtue of having evolved onto land and then back to ocean, they used to be wolf-like creatures. They returned back to the ocean. Scientists don't know why. They think maybe food source. I think they knew something about that. I call it big blue love. I think they returned back to that. They lost their gills. They had to free dive, which means they have to have long exhales, which I believe myelinates the vagus nerve, which is the connection between our heart and our brain. And I have all these theories about how they are the most compassionate beings. So I created these retreats as an offering so that people could have this experience of love and being held and learning from the emissaries of compassion. We have so much to learn. And I also want to invite people to love this earth and the ocean, because without her, nothing else matters. Everything that's going on, I'm fierce about activism. I'm fierce about anti-racist work. I'm fierce about, a regenerative economy. It all takes place on planet Earth. And the ocean is the most important, without the ocean, which provides a lot of oxygen. People think trees do provide a lot of our oxygen. So does the ocean. It's actually because of whale poop. And I'm not a scientist. Their poop does something with actually the exchange of carbon dioxide and oxygen. It releases oxygen.
Wow.
Whales are amazing. So this trip was my 7th time being with humpbacks. And next year, we were invited actually to swim with sperm whales, which require the trip that we were on, they do much smaller groups. They're doing some research with sperm whales. And you have to be really strong in the water, which Carl and I are. So I'm already like, we're going to go swim with the sperm whales, honey. Because And, again, I'm so blessed. And I will, I'll say one thing about that. It's not, these trips require, some resources because you got to fly places. The first time I wanted to do it, I didn't have enough to get to Tonga. And my father, who was already in his dementia, that was part of his, descent out of life, but he had really richly lucid moments. And he knew about my love of whales. And I was showing him videos and he said, "You really want to go do this?" And I said, "Yep, I'm saving money for the plane ticket. I have an opportunity to work on a trip." And he said to me, "I'll buy your plane ticket, but you have to make one promise, one commitment." I said, "What's that, Dad?" He said, "Listen to what they tell you and never stop listening." He said, "You've always been close to the animals." He says, "And you've talked about this." He says, "You know that you need to go listen." So he tapped into what that energy, it's an energy exchange. They are so willing to love us and to remind us to love ourselves. So
Beautiful. Thank you.
You should come sometime, Heidi. Come.
Thank you for the invitation.
I'm like, sign me up. That sounds
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah, both of you. I wasn't excluding you. I'm just thinking because sometimes people are like, "Oh, I don't know if I want to go." I'm like, "Come on, just go." know. Yeah, I did. I had to drag my husband a little bit at first, but he loved it. He loved it.
Good. Yeah, good. So here we are at the end of our hour already. I can't, we say this every time, don't we? Because the hour flies by. So we'll do a chat pack question. And the question this week is, what one little known fact about you would perhaps come as the biggest surprise to people who think they know you well? I'll read it again if you want me to read it again.
No, I'm just trying to think because I don't know if some of the things that I thought it would surprise people. I don't know. Are we all answering it or just?
Yes, we're all going to answer. And I'm happy to go first.
Okay.
If you don't already.
Water.
So I love dark. I love dark humor. I love suspense. And several of my favorite movies that actually move me to tears because of the relationships have quite a bit of violence in them. And I've actually, in my own way, I've studied the juxtaposition between the emotion and then, the connection of characters as well as the violence. And I'm like, that's just, I don't know what it says about me, but anyway, I find it fascinating. And I also have this ability, like, I really appreciate good writing and smart humor. And so when something seems very surface, like, just a silly comedy, I have this ability to take the humor to a darker place. I don't know what that's called, but I love doing that. And it really, I like genuinely guffaw and laugh hard. So anyway, that's a little known fact you may not have known about me.
Amber, do you want to go next?
Sure. It's funny because I was thinking of one thing and then listening to you, Heidi, I'm thinking of another. The first thing I was thinking of is that I once got to ride in and fly for a moment a fighter jet. I love fighter jets. My first thesis out of college was about weapons. I love fighter jets, so I got to fly one once. But what you were just saying, Heidi, reminded me when I was a little girl, I couldn't go to sleep on Friday nights if I didn't watch horror movies. They would help me sleep. They would calm me down.
Oh, wow.
So, I don't know if those are surprise. I know some people who know me will be like, that's not a surprise, but dancing in the terrain of Scorpio, which we both are.
Yeah.
So those are two things, may or may not be surprising.
I love that both of your answers have sort of shifted mine, because I'm gonna be like, oh, I used to be, a stand-in for certain actresses when I was in LA doing the acting thing. But for me, I think, I mean, my partner knows this, but I love curmudgeon-y characters in films. Like just the grumpiest, most sarcastic, most irritable, sometimes OCD, quirky characters. They're like my spirit animals. I just so relate to them, even though I might come off this way. I'm like, yeah, say it, just name it, And to your point, Amber, about horror movies, because I grew up watching probably everything in the Blockbuster under that section. I still think of Freddy Krueger when I take a bath. Remember that scene from Nightmare on Elm Street? Yeah.
Yes.
It's a one moment, but every time it's like I'm in the bath and I'm like, like it's still with me somehow.
Yeah.
So let me just add, I don't like gore. Like that doesn't do anything for me. I just find it so gross, but I do like the suspense of things. That excites me for some reason. Yeah.
Yes.
So thank you for joining us today, being with us and sharing your wisdom and your stories and your energy and love and all of it. I'm moved by it. I'm just really, touched.
Mhm.
And to my podcast partner. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I'm really inspired by what you do, Amber, and this conversation feels so rich and like it's easily a part 2 and 3 and 4 of
Yeah.
is how to navigate this world together. And thank you for supporting those who have been through such difficult parts of our humanity. What a gift you are. Thank you.
Thank you. Lovely to meet you, Feresta. I hope I said your name right.
You did. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.